He didn't notice the apples at first. They were half-rotten, bruised along the edges, scattered behind the old barn like someone had thrown them in a hurry. Jasper Reed had been meaning to clear out that part of the property for weeks now. But something always came up: fence posts to mend, a lame calf to tend, firewood to split. The land never stopped asking for things. He walked past those apples twice that morning before something made him stop. Maybe it was the faint sound of movement, so soft it could have been the wind brushing through the grass. Or maybe it was just the silence. It was too still, too quiet. And after what he'd lived through, Jasper didn't trust quiet. He stepped around the barn slowly, boots sinking into the damp earth, his hand resting on the edge of his belt where his old Colt still hung. Not because he expected trouble. He hadn't had real trouble on this land in over a year. But because the world had taught him to always be ready for it. That's when he saw them. 3 of them. Boys. Filthy, rail-thin, with wild hair and eyes that had forgotten how to be children's eyes. The oldest looked no more than 5, a boy with tangled red hair and scabs across his knees. The boy next to him was maybe 4, face hollow, clutching a half-eaten apple like it was the first real thing he'd touched in days. And the smallest, Lord, the smallest was barely 3, curled up under the boards with his thumb in his mouth and a bruise under his cheekbone the size of a man's thumb. Jasper didn't speak right away. He just stood there, staring, and they stared back like animals expecting the whip. The oldest jumped to his feet, blocking the smaller 2 with his arms out wide. He looked like he was ready to claw Jasper's face off if he took a step closer. "Don't touch him," he said, voice cracked and shaking. "We ain't talking nothing. We was hungry, that's all." Jasper slowly raised both hands, the way he'd do with a spooked mare. He didn't know what to say. His voice had been quiet for a long time now, barely used except to curse or whisper his dead wife's name when the nights got too heavy. "I'm not going to hurt you," he finally said, careful with every word. "Just sit a spell. I'll bring some bread." He went back inside the house, hands shaking worse than he expected. Not from fear. He'd buried that kind of fear long ago, but from something he couldn't name. Something raw and twisting. He pulled what little food he had, a half loaf, some dried apples, a jar of jam his neighbor had given him last fall, and set it all down on a wooden tray. When he returned, they were still there. The oldest boy's eyes never left him. He didn't ask questions that day. Didn't ask who they were, where they came from, why the youngest had a bruise, or why none of them had shoes. He just watched them eat, watched the way their hands shook and how they kept glancing behind them, like someone might come and snatch it all away. It had been 6 years since Sarah died. 6 years since the stillbirth, the blood, and the silence that followed. She wanted a big family. Said the house was too quiet, even with the chickens clucking outside and the cows lowing in the distance. After she was gone, the house had stayed quiet. Jasper never remarried. Never wanted to. He filled the days with work until they bled together. The nights he filled with whiskey and memories. He thought he'd made peace with the quiet. He thought wrong. That night, he lay awake listening to the wind and thinking about those boys. He didn't even know their names. And still, he couldn't stop picturing them curled up in the dirt behind the barn, defending bruised apples like they were gold. The smallest one, his name turned out to be Lottie, had wrapped his little arms around Jasper's leg before he left and whispered something so soft he hadn't caught it first. "Smells like Mama's house." The next morning, he found them again. Not behind the barn this time, but near the woodpile, half asleep, huddled together under a frayed blanket that looked like it had been dragged through a storm. The 4-year-old stirred when he saw him and sat up fast, fist clenched like he expected to be struck. "You got names?" Jasper asked. The oldest hesitated, then nodded. "I'm Willa. That's my brother Joe. Lottie's the youngest." Jasper nodded. "Well, Willa, Joe, Lottie, this ain't no place to sleep. Come inside. Got room if you want it." Willa's chin jutted up like he was about to argue. But the way Joe looked at the front door, you'd think it was a castle. After a long pause, Willa nodded. Not a word, just a quiet, stubborn nod. And Jasper turned back toward the house, without looking to see if they followed. He didn't tell anyone. Not the sheriff. Not the pastor. Not even old Martha up the hill who always found out everything before noon. He knew what the law would say. Orphans belonged in town, in a proper home, in some widow's care or a church basement. But Jasper didn't trust places with rules and walls. Not for boys who flinched at sudden movements and watched every door like it was waiting to slam shut on them. No, they needed space, dirt under their feet, a porch to sit on and not be told to move. That's something Jasper could give. The days passed slow. Willa never let Lottie out of his sight. Joe started helping with the goats, not because Jasper asked, but because the boys seemed desperate to be useful. Willa fixed a broken hinge on the chicken coop with nothing but a rock and a hairpin, and Jasper didn't say a word about it, but he noticed. He also noticed that none of them ever laughed. One evening, he walked into the kitchen and caught Lottie staring at a picture on the wall. Him and Sarah, back when her smile lit up a room and he still believed things could last. Lottie touched the frame with his tiny fingers and turned his head. "That's your wife." Jasper nodded. "Yeah, she was pretty. She was," he said, voice tight. Lottie turned back to the photo and looked at it a long time. Then he whispered something, just loud enough to break Jasper's heart clean in two. "Can I call you Papa?" Jasper didn't answer right away. His throat closed up and his hands curled into fists at his sides. He wanted to say no, not out of meanness, but because it felt like stealing something sacred. But Lottie didn't need sacred. He needed safe. He crouched down slowly, hands on his knees, and looked him in the eye. "You can call me whatever makes you feel safe, Sugar." Lottie smiled, just barely. Then he nodded and walked off like it was settled. Later that night, Jasper sat on the porch and looked out across the land. The sky had turned orange and purple, soft against the hills. The wind carried the sound of Lottie's giggle from the far side of the house where he was chasing chickens. Joe's voice called out, telling him to be careful. Willis sat by the fence, watching like he was still waiting for it all to end. Jasper watched him too, because he knew the world didn't let boys like them have peace for long. He just didn't know yet how close danger, italicized, was. Jasper had never been good with words. He'd been raised by a father who thought silence was a virtue and a mother who died before she could teach him otherwise. Most of what Jasper learned about people, he learned by watching small things like how a person held their shoulders or the way they looked down when they were lying. That's how he began to understand Willa. He didn't trust kindness. He didn't know what to do with it. Every time Jasper offered something, a fresh biscuit, a clean shirt he'd picked up in town, a quiet smile, Willa looked at it like it might explode. His hands were quick and capable, and his voice sharp when he spoke, but there was a way he watched the door when it closed, like he measured how fast it could open again if he needed to run. Joe was different, wound tight but not hard. He clung to Jasper's quiet strength the way a boy clings to a tree in a flood. And Lottie, well, he bloomed faster than Jasper was ready for. He called him Papa now without flinching, and sometimes reached for his hand without warning, as if he already believed the world was finally safe again. By the end of the second week, the house didn't feel so quiet anymore. Willis started sitting at the table during breakfast, still stiff but present. Joe followed Jasper around the yard like a shadow, asking about tools, animals, the old well. Lottie began to hum, soft, off-key tunes that sounded like something he barely remembered from another life. Jasper started leaving the bedroom door open at night, not because he worried about them leaving, but because he didn't want to miss a sound if one of them cried out. Then came the first visitor. Her name was Hazel Quinn. She'd been Sarah's friend once, back when Sarah used to host Sunday dinners and plant wildflowers in coffee tins for the kitchen windowsill. Hazel was a widow now, with a sharp eye and a voice that carried down the road, whether you wanted to hear it or not. She showed up unannounced. As usual, a basket of rhubarb jam and questions in her arms. "I heard you've got boys on your porch," she said, stepping inside like she still lived there. "Is it true?" Jasper didn't answer. He didn't lie either. He just wiped his hands on a rag and motioned toward the window where the boys sat on the porch, sorting beans with clumsy little fingers. Hazel's eyes softened for a moment. They yours? No. Family? No. Well, someone ought to be asking where their people are. Jasper looked at her for a long second. Maybe their people were the ones they were running from. That shut her up. For now. Hazel didn't say more about it that day, but word would travel. Jasper knew that. This town didn't need telegrams or papers to spread a story. One curious neighbor could turn a quiet mercy into public business by dusk. Still, he didn't regret opening the door to them. Not once. That night, he found Willa sitting by the fire, staring into the flames like they owed him answers. He sat beside him, slow and quiet. After a minute, he spoke. We were at the mill town before this. They made us sleep in the back room of the feed store. Mr. John said we could stay if we stayed out of sight. But he hit Joe when he dropped a sack of oats. Jasper's jaw tightened. Then he started looking at me strange, Willa added, voice flat. Like he was waiting for me to grow up quicker than I was. So I left. How long you been running? Willa shrugged. Since Mama died. So a while, I guess. He didn't mention a father. Jasper didn't ask. Instead, he offered something small. You fixed that coop hinge better than I ever could have. Willa looked at him, uncertain. I'm good with my hands. I can tell. Silence fell again. But this time it was easier. Days turned into weeks. Hazel stopped by more often, bringing odds and ends the boys needed, but Jasper never asked for. Boots that almost fit, a bar of lye soap, mended clothes from her late husband's trunk. Sometimes she stayed to help Lottie brush his hair or to teach Willa how to make cornbread. She didn't ask many more questions. Instead, she started leaving little things behind. A scarf, a book, a look in her eyes that Jasper had seen once before, back when Sarah first took his hand across the church picnic table. Jasper didn't know what to make of it. Hazel had never looked at him like that before. He wasn't sure if he wanted her now. He wasn't ready for whatever this was. Whatever it meant when someone started looking at him like he was more than a man with ghosts and a creaky barn. But he didn't turn her away, either. He began to notice other things, too. Willow was growing into himself. The fear didn't vanish, but it dulled. He stopped flinching when the screen door banged shut. Joe began to laugh, actually laugh, when he and Jasper mucked out the stall and the goat knocked him into the hay. Lottie followed him everywhere now, even when he was just going to check the traps along the ridge. He'd run to him and wrap his arms around his leg like he was the only steady thing in the world. He started to feel it, too. That dangerous, warm feeling. Hope. But there were shadows still waiting. And one of them had a name. Grady Lott. Jasper heard about him from Tom Marshall, the blacksmith in town. Said a man had been asking around, rough voice, real pushy, smelled like old liquor and gun oil. Said he was looking for 3 boys named Willa, Joe, and Lottie. Said they were his kin, though folks said he didn't act like someone with love on his mind. Jasper's gut turned to stone. He didn't tell the boys, not yet. But he started checking the locks more carefully at night. Started sleeping a little lighter. When Hazel came by the next afternoon, he pulled Stower aside. You ever heard of Grady Lott? Her face went cold. Yeah, I heard of him. He the kind of man that'd hurt a child. She looked down. He's the kind of man who hurts what he can't control. Jasper nodded. That night, he sharpened his axe. Then he sat in the dark, listening for footsteps that never came. Still, life went on. Willa planted beans in the back lot and checked on them every morning like he expected them to talk back. Joe kept a journal now, just small notes about the farm, but it mattered to him. Lottie drew pictures on the floorboards with coal, mostly stick figures and hearts with little names under them. One morning, Jasper found a scribble of 4 people standing under a crooked sun. He'd written me, Joe, Willa, and under the tallest one he wrote Papa. He kept that drawing, folded it, pressed it into the back of his Bible, and didn't tell a soul. Then came the rain. It poured for 2 days straight, filling the creek, soaking the barn, turning the trails to sludge. On the 3rd night, the thunder rolled in like drums. Jasper stood at the window, staring out at the storm when he saw it, just for a second. A shadow moving near the fence line. Too tall to be Joe, too still to be astray. He grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. The wind bit at his face. He walked slow, eyes sweeping the trees. Who's out there? No answer, but something was coming. He could feel it deep in his chest. Inside, Lottie whimpered in his sleep. Joe stirred. Willa sat up, eyes wide, already reaching for the knife Jasper had shown him how to keep hidden under his bed. The past was coming back. Jasper just didn't know yet if he'd be able to stop it. But he knew one thing for sure. No one was taking those boys again. Not while he still had breath in his body. The days after the storm were still and strangely golden, as if the world had taken a breath and held it. The rain had washed everything clean. The air, the earth, even Jasper's heavy thoughts. The mud around the barn dried into cracking plates, and the boys seemed to bloom with the sunshine that followed. It should have felt like peace. Instead, Jasper walked with a tighter jaw, his eyes always scanning the horizon. He hadn't seen the figure again since that night, but something in his bones told him they weren't alone anymore. Despite that quiet tension, life on the farm began to grow fuller, steadier. There were moments, small and ordinary, that made Jasper ache in the chest without quite knowing why. One afternoon, Joe ran into the house covered in flour, grinning wide after Lottie dumped half a sack on his head while helping Hazel bake biscuits. Hazel laughed harder than Jasper had ever heard, wiping her hands on her apron while Joe declared himself the new biscuit sheriff of the county. Another morning, Willa asked Jasper to teach him how to saddle the old mare. His voice was clipped, almost like a dare, but his eyes held something else, something like trust. Jasper didn't speak much during the lesson. He just let him learn with his hands, correcting his grip or his balance gently, patiently, and he didn't flinch once. That night, Willa stood by the fence and said, quiet as a whisper, "I used to be scared of horses." Jasper glanced over, waiting. My real daddy had a black stallion. Mean, big eyes. He said if I ever ran, that horse'd find me. Jasper didn't speak right away. That one, he nodded toward the old mare, wouldn't chase you. She's too stubborn to follow anyone. Willa laughed just once. Guess I like her then. There were many such moments, small victories, little signs that the walls around the boys were starting to crack. Joe started leaving the back room door open when he slept. Lottie began drawing people smiling instead of just standing there. Willa helped fix the broken trough without being asked. These weren't grand gestures, but they were everything. Jasper didn't know how to name it, but something like family was happening here. He felt it in the way his heart clenched when the boys laughed or when Hazel stayed a little longer than she needed to. Hazel had become more than just a neighbor. She came by at least twice a week now, often bringing something she claimed was extra from her pantry. Preserves, old books, sewing thread, a shirt that happened to fit Joe by luck. She didn't pry much, not anymore, but her eyes missed nothing. Jasper caught her watching him sometimes, especially when he talked to the boys, when he reached out without meaning to and brushed Willa's hair back or lifted Lottie onto the fence. There was something in her gaze, a quiet, cautious affection that she never said aloud. One evening after supper, Hazel lingered on the porch while the boys played in the yard. The sky had turned pink and gold, the last of the sunlight catching dust motes in the air. Jasper sat beside her on the step, not touching, not speaking for a long time. "You care about them," she said finally. He nodded. "They're not mine, but they're here. That counts for more than blood." He looked at her. "You think I'm doing right?" Hazel didn't answer right away. Then, "I think you're doing what a good man does when the world don't give him a clear path." Jasper turned that over in his head for a while after she left. It had been years since anyone called him a good man without suspicion. It felt strange. But even as the boys began to settle, their fears didn't disappear. They just grew quieter, harder to spot unless you were paying attention. And Jasper paid attention. Willa flinched at loud voices. Joe slept with his boots by the bed. Lottie clung too hard when he hugged, like he was afraid to let go. One night, Willa didn't come in for supper. Jasper found him out in the old hayloft, curled into a ball behind the feed sacks. His arms were wrapped around his knees, eyes open but far away. "You okay?" he asked. He didn't answer. He didn't move closer, just leaned against the beam. "I sometimes come up here, too, when I want the world to leave me be." His voice was small. "I had a brother, baby brother. He didn't make it. Fever took him." Jasper's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I was holding him when he died. Mama was out getting milk. I thought if I didn't move, he'd stay warm." Jasper closed his eyes, the pain in his words landing like a hammer. Willow wiped his face hard with the heel of his palm. "I didn't tell Joe or Lottie. They were already scared. But sometimes I see him when I close my eyes." He finally moved, stepping slow and crouching beside him. "That's not your fault, Willa." He looked up at him, eyes wet but defiant. "Feels like it." He didn't try to argue, just sat with him in the still air of the loft, the two of them breathing through the heaviness in silence. As summer stretched on, the stakes deepened, though Jasper couldn't always say how. The town grew curious. Some folks just nodded politely when they passed him on the road. Others, like Sheriff Tuttle, began to show up with less friendly faces. The sheriff visited one morning under the pretense of looking for strays. "Neighbors say you've got some boys staying here," he said, eyeing the front porch where Joe and Lottie sat reading. Jasper crossed his arms. "They're safe here. Doesn't mean it's legal. Legal don't always mean right." The sheriff tilted his head. "You want to help them? Might be time you filed a petition. Otherwise, someone else might." That night, Jasper paced. Willow watched him from the kitchen doorway. "You gonna take us?" he asked. "Not if I can help it. People like him. You don't care what we've been through." Jasper stopped, met his eyes. "I care. That's got to be worth something." He started the paperwork the next morning. Hazel helped, sitting beside him at the table with forms and ink and patience. "They'll ask questions," she warned, "about where the boys came from, about who might still have a claim on them. I'll give them answers. The truth I know." Hazel looked at him then, not like a neighbor, but like someone who was choosing him. "You're not alone in this, Jasper." The boys noticed a shift. Jasper dressed sharper when they went into town. He started calling Lottie darling more often, holding his hand like it was second nature. Joe beamed when Jasper introduced him as "my boy" to the clerk at the feed store. Willis said nothing, but his silence changed. It wasn't wary anymore. It was thoughtful. But shadows don't vanish with new clothes or kind words. One night, Willa jolted awake from a nightmare, screaming for his mother. Jasper rushed in to find him trembling, soaked in sweat. He wouldn't speak for a long time. Then finally, he used to come in drunk and say we were just mouths to feed. Said I was too old to be useless. Jasper sat beside him. "Grady?" He nodded. "I won't let him near you," he said, steady and certain. He looked at him like he was trying to believe it. "You can't be everywhere." "No," he agreed, "but I'll try anyway." It wasn't long after that when the letter came. A thick envelope from the courthouse requesting further details. Hazel read it first, her face tight. They're not saying no, but they're saying it's complicated. Everything was. Grady Lott had moved counties years ago, but there were rumors he was still out there, still dangerous. If he came forward with any claim, no matter how cruel, things could fall apart. Jasper took a long walk that evening. He followed the fence line until he reached the creek, sat down on a stump, and stared at the water. He didn't know if he was strong enough to fight the law and a man like Grady both. But he knew one thing deep in his gut. He wasn't letting go of those boys. Not now. Not ever. Back at the house, Willa tucked Lottie into bed, his hands gentle, his voice soft. Joe sat beside them, humming a tune their mother used to sing. When Jasper returned, Willa looked up at him and said, "We'll fight if we have to." He nodded. "We've already made it this far." And that was true. But what none of them could yet see was how close the past truly was. Grady Lott wasn't just a ghost. He was real, and he was coming. The first sign was the tracks. Jasper spotted them near the lower gate, early one morning as he made his usual rounds. Deep impressions in the soft earth, where no one but him had walked in weeks, big, deliberate boot prints headed toward the barn, then doubling back. Whoever made them didn't steal anything, didn't break in. They just watched, stood in the dark while the house slept. Jasper stood there a long time, eyes scanning the tree line, the breeze brushing through the tall grass like fingers on skin. He didn't need a name carved in the dirt to know who it was. Grady Lott had found them. That night, Jasper didn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair on the porch, rifle across his lap, eyes never leaving the road. The boys stayed inside, unaware, their laughter still echoing in the hallway as they got ready for bed. He couldn't bear to tell them. Not yet. Not until he had something better to offer than fear. Hazel was the first person he told. She listened in silence, hands folded in her lap, the firelight catching the tension in her jaw. He's watching the place, Jasper said. I don't know if he'll wait for the law or if he'll come knocking himself. Hazel didn't flinch. What are you going to do? Whatever it takes. But whatever it takes started feeling heavier by the hour. The petition for guardianship was stuck in legal limbo. Judge Rowantown had promised to review it carefully, which meant nothing. Jasper had no blood claim to the boys. No documents, no birth records, no living will from their mother. Just bruises, stories, and the weight of what they'd survived. Meanwhile, the shadows outside kept growing longer. One morning, Willa came inside shaking, holding something in his hand. A scrap of paper, dirty and crumpled, stuffed through the slats of the porch railing. Just 5 words, written in thick, jagged charcoal. They're mine. You know it. He didn't cry, but he went quiet, too quiet, like someone who'd been shot but didn't feel it yet. Jasper burned the note in the stove and told Joe to stay close to the house from now on. Lottie didn't understand. He just knew his papa was different now. Tense, quieter. Willa tried to be strong, but Jasper could see the way he checked the windows every few minutes, the way he jumped when the dog barked. 2 nights later, the barn door was left open. Jasper always latched it, every night. But when he stepped outside before dawn to check on the chickens, he saw the door swinging wide in the wind. Inside, the hay was scattered, a saddle knocked over. Nothing taken, but someone had been there. Joe asked him at breakfast, "Papa, is somebody after us?" Jasper looked him in the eye. He couldn't lie. "Maybe, but you don't need to be scared." Joe frowned. "I'm not scared. I just want to know how to help." Willa didn't speak at all. That night, he slipped out the back door and climbed the oak tree near the road. He sat up there with a pair of binoculars Jasper didn't even know he'd found, watching the road until his fingers went numb. Jasper didn't yell at him. He just brought him a blanket and a lantern and sat under the tree until he finally climbed down. "They'll take us away, won't they?" he asked softly. "I won't let them," Jasper said. "But you ain't the law." "No," he admitted, "but I'm stronger than I used to be." Willa studied his face in the moonlight, his eyes tired but sharp. "You still cry for her?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Sarah?" He nodded. "Sometimes," he said honestly. Willa nodded once. "I cry for Mama too. Only Joe don't know. He thinks I don't miss her. You carry the weight for both of them." He looked at him, then, like something inside him wanted to believe he could carry his weight too. But the belief was fragile. A week later, the sheriff came back. "Got a man named Grady Lott down at the jail," Sheriff Tuttle said, standing on the porch like he had every right. "Says he's the boy's daddy." Jasper didn't move. "He's a drunk. A mean one. Doesn't change the law." He filed a claim. "Wants a hearing." "He hurt them," Jasper said, voice low, steady. "You really gonna hand them back over?" Sheriff Tuttle sighed. "It's not up to me. You get your evidence. Show up in front of Judge Rowe. Make your case." Willa overheard it. He stood behind the door and didn't say a word. But that night, he packed a small bag. Jasper found under the bed 2 biscuits, a knife, Lottie's favorite toy horse. "You were going to run," he said. "I was going to save them," he snapped. Jasper crouched beside him, his voice gentler than it had ever been. "You don't have to run anymore. You have people now. We fight now." Willa looked at him, his face flushed with shame and fear. "If he gets us back, he'll kill Joe. Or worse. You don't know what he's like." I know exactly what he's like, Jasper said, something sharp behind his words. I knew men like him my whole life, and I know how to face them. He didn't sleep the next night either. Just sat with the rifle again, the weight of the boys' lives pressing harder than ever. It wasn't just about love now. It was about proof, paperwork, witnesses, something more than good intentions. And Grady had none of that, but he had the name. That was enough for the court. Hazel, always steady, came the next morning with news. I heard the judge is skeptical, says there's no evidence the boys were in danger. She looked furious. What kind of world needs a black eye on a baby before they believe him? Jasper stared out the window. There was a black eye. On Lottie. When I found him, you didn't take a photograph? No, I didn't think like a lawyer. I just fed him. Hazel placed a gentle hand on his arm. Then we'll find another way. They started gathering what they could. Hazel helped write a statement. The feed store owner recalled seeing Willa dragging Joe away from an older man last spring. The schoolhouse teacher remembered Joe showing up once with bruises and no shoes. Bit by bit, they stitched together a fragile net of testimony. The hearing was set for Friday. Jasper dressed in his only suit. The boy stayed at Hazel's. He rode into town with fire in his chest. Grady Lott sat in the courtroom with a sneer on his face. Thick-shouldered, greasy, drunk from the night before. He didn't look at Jasper, just stared straight ahead, as if he knew he didn't need to do much. He had the birth certificate. The same system that failed Willa's mother was now listening to him. Judge Rowe listened with a cool expression. Jasper spoke plainly, gave no speeches, just the truth. What he saw, what he knew, how the boys acted, what they whispered in the dark. Then at the end, Willa stood up. No one asked him to. He just rose, walked forward, and stood beside Jasper. My mom is dead, he said, his voice clear. She told me to run if Grady ever raised his hand again. She said not all men are devils, but some don't have souls. The judge shifted in his chair. Jasper didn't ask for us, he continued. We just showed up, and he let us stay, and he didn't touch us. Not once. Not with anger. Not with fear. He taught us how to sleep again. I call him Papa now. That's not blood, but it's real. Even the court stenographer's hands paused for a breath. When it was over, the judge said he'd take it under review. But Jasper didn't hear that. He only heard Willa standing tall beside him, choosing him. Outside the courthouse, Grady spat near his boots. This ain't over. Jasper stepped forward. Yes, it is. You think you can keep him from me? Jasper didn't blink. You lost him the moment they had a choice. Grady didn't swing. Maybe he saw something in Jasper's eyes that made him think twice. Or maybe the lawman standing nearby reminded him that his bluff had worn thin. Either way, he turned and walked off, boots heavy on the planks. Back at the house, Lottie ran to Jasper before he was even off the horse. Joe followed close, eyes scanning his face. Well, he asked. Jasper nodded. We're not done fighting, but we're not running either. Willa stood on the porch. His hands were steady, and Jasper, tired, shaking, but still standing, finally let out the breath he'd been holding since the first apple behind the barn. The battle wasn't over. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The morning they got the judge's letter, the wind was sharp and dry. It blew dust along the porch steps and rattled the panes in the kitchen window. Jasper found the envelope in the mailbox at the end of the path, thick with the weight of an answer he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. He didn't open it right away, just held it, turning it over in his hand like a man holding a loaded pistol. Willa saw him from the porch and came down the steps slow, his face unreadable. Joe watched from the window, and Lottie was sitting in the dirt with his toy horses, humming to himself, oblivious for now. You gonna read it? Willa asked, his voice quieter than usual. Jasper nodded. Yeah, just needed a second. Hazel was on her way, riding down the trail with her usual no-nonsense pace. He waited until she arrived, until her hand was on his shoulder and her eyes were steady. Then he opened it. The judge had ruled for a temporary guardianship, pending a final review in 6 months. The boys could stay. For now. But Grady still had the right to contest. And if he showed up again, cleaner, quieter, smarter, he could make it harder. Jasper read the words twice, then folded the letter carefully. "We bought time," he said, "but not safety." Willa didn't say anything. He just looked up at him, and the look in his eyes said more than he ever could. He was tired of running, of waiting for the next storm. And Jasper understood that because he was, too. Later that night, Hazel stayed behind after the boys went to bed. The house was quiet except for the creak of the wood and the faint sound of Lottie's breathing through the thin walls. They sat at the kitchen table, sharing a cup of coffee, the shadows long across the floor. "You've changed," Hazel said softly. Jasper gave her a tired smile. "How so? You used to speak like the world had already ended. Now you look like someone who still believes in things." He shook his head. "I believe in them. Willa, Joe, Lottie, I believe in what they've survived." Hazel studied him for a long moment. "But do you believe in you?" That landed harder than he expected. Because the truth was, he didn't know. After Sarah died, he had locked something away so deep he forgot where he'd put it. Hope, joy, the idea that anything could be rebuilt from ash. He had buried all of it with the tiny wooden box they lowered into the earth beside her, the one that was supposed to be their son. He remembered Sarah's face that day, her hand reaching for his, cold and trembling. He remembered holding her until she went still. And after that, he didn't remember much at all, until the day 3 hungry boys showed up behind his barn. That night, he sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea going cold in his hands. He could hear them breathing in the other room. He could feel their presence like gravity. For the first time, he let the memories in, not just of Sarah's death, but of who he used to be before the loss hollowed him out. The kind of man who carved rocking horses, who built a cradle by hand months before they even knew if it'd be a boy or girl, who had once whispered dreams into his wife's belly. He'd forgotten that man. But Willa's quiet strength, Joe's awkward loyalty, Lottie's wide-eyed trust, they had brought parts of him back, parts that had no business still being alive. He closed his eyes and let himself feel the grief again. Not push it away, not drink it down, just feel it. And it hurt in ways he didn't think it still could. But when he opened his eyes, the pain had changed. It was lighter, not gone, but no longer the whole story. In the weeks that followed, he began to prepare, not for war, but for permanence. He filed more papers, sought out witnesses, gathered statements. He talked to Reverend Cole about baptism and schooling and started carving a new table big enough for 5. Not because the law asked for it, but because the boys deserved more than borrowed space. Still, the weight of Grady's shadow lingered. He hadn't come back since the court hearing, but Jasper knew better than to believe he was gone. Then, one Sunday afternoon, the shadow returned in the form of a knock. It was a slow, deliberate knock, not the kind of knock a neighbor makes. Jasper opened the door and saw him, Grady Lott. Cleaner now, hat on, shirt tucked in, boots polished. His eyes were still cold, though. Still mean. "You got no right," Jasper said, voice like gravel. "I got every right," Grady answered, showing him a paper. "I'm still their blood. That means something." "Not to me." Grady took a step forward. "You think I'll stay here? That the judge will forget me just 'cause you play house for a while?" Jasper didn't move. "I think Willa told the truth. And the truth always leaves a mark." Grady sneered. "He's just a boy. He don't know what he wants." "You're wrong about that," said a voice behind Jasper. "Willa." He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, back straight. "I know what I want. I want you gone." Grady's face twisted. "You little." But Jasper stepped between them. "That's enough." Grady's voice dropped low. "You're not their father." Jasper met his eyes. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that's the kind that lasts. Grady stared at him for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he turned and walked away. Jasper exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time in days. Willa looked up at him. "I needed to say it," he whispered, to his face. "I know," Jasper said. "You did good. That confrontation marked something deep, like a final break in a chain Willa had carried too long. He smiled more after that, laughed even. Lottie started calling him brother again without fear. Joe stopped waiting for approval and started offering it, giving Jasper a thumbs up when he fixed the wagon or made them all laugh at dinner. One evening, Willa asked Jasper to help him with something out back. He found Sarah's old garden, overgrown and forgotten. "We should plant again," he said. "Something new." They worked until dusk, side by side, hands in the dirt. It felt right, like building something that might last. Hazel watched from the porch, a soft smile on her face. Later, after the boys were asleep, she sat beside Jasper again. "I saw you with him," she said. "He wanted to plant something. You gave him that," Hazel said. "You give all of them what they need, even when you're still learning how." He looked at her, this woman who had stayed longer than she had to, who never pushed, never demanded, just stood beside him. "I'm scared," Jasper admitted, "of losing them, of not being enough." Hazel reached for his hand. "Being scared don't make you weak. It makes you human, and you're not alone in this. You never were." He held her hand tighter. That night, Jasper dreamed, not of Sarah, not of loss, but of laughter, little footsteps, the sound of Lottie's voice yelling across the field, "Papa, look at me." When he woke, he didn't cry. He just smiled, a quiet, tired smile that meant something real. The pain would always live in him, but it no longer controlled the story. The story had changed, and he wasn't done living it yet. The first daffodil pushed through the dirt on a quiet morning in March. Willa found it by the fence, yellow and crooked, fighting its way through the cold ground. He called out for Lottie, who came running barefoot, his shirt dragging mud, and knelt beside it with a grin too big for his face. That flower became a kind of sign, a soft, living proof that the earth, when tended with care and patience, always finds a way to bloom again. Life had settled into something close to peace. Not the loud, storybook kind, but the quieter version that grows over time, like moss on stone. The boys had stayed. That temporary guardianship, once so fragile, had turned into something stronger, legally binding now. Official. There were papers signed, filed, and stamped. But the real proof lived in the way Joe called Jasper Pa now, without hesitation, or how Willa asked before heading out to check the traps, or how Lottie climbed onto Jasper's lap each night with his blanket and never once asked if he had to leave. Jasper had never seen himself as someone who would build a family out of broken pieces. But the more he looked around, the more he realized this family had been built the same way he fixed his roof or his fence, board by board, day by day, never rushed. And somehow, in all that time, love had slipped in, quiet and certain. Willa had grown taller. His face had filled out, and the hard lines of survival were slowly giving way to something softer. He still had his edge, still guarded his feelings like a soldier, but he laughed more. He teased Joe and helped Lottie tie his hair with scraps of ribbon. Some nights he sat beside Jasper on the porch and asked him about things, his past, his wife, the baby he lost. Not out of curiosity, but out of something like respect. They both carried grief, and now, little by little, they were setting it down between them, piece by piece. Joe had found a rhythm to life that gave him confidence. He started helping Hazel deliver food to the older folks who couldn't leave their homes. He could sharpen tools, stack wood, and had a knack for fixing the squeaky hinge on the pantry door. His pride showed in the way he stood taller, the way he smiled when he caught Jasper watching him. And Lottie was the glue between them all. Still wild and free as a breeze, but full of light. He sang nonsense songs at breakfast and whispered secrets to the chickens. He had begun to draw pictures of their home, and every one of them had 5 people now. Him, Joe, Willa, Hazel, and Jasper. Always together, always smiling. One evening in late spring, Hazel brought over a wooden box and laid it on the table. Inside were Sarah's old recipe cards. She'd found them while helping clean out the attic, tucked away in a rusted tin. Jasper froze when he saw her handwriting, steady, round, with little flower smudges along the edges. He held the card for apple pie and felt the ache of remembering, but it wasn't sharp anymore. Just tender. Hazel sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his. "She would have liked what you built here," she said. Jasper nodded. "She'd have liked you, too." Hazel smiled, soft and full. She didn't need more than that. Some love doesn't ask for declarations. It just lives quietly in the steady presence of someone who never leaves. Willis started making plans of his own. He asked to visit the schoolhouse more regularly. Said he might want to learn more than just farm work. Maybe even teach one day, he said, half joking. "You'd be good at it," Jasper told him. He blinked like he hadn't expected that answer. "You think so? I've seen you teach Joe how to fix a latch," he said. "You've got a way of showing people how to be better without making them feel smaller." Willow looked away, but he saw his smile. Joe, too, had dreams now. He asked about carpentry, about learning to build furniture, maybe even houses one day. Jasper promised to teach him everything he knew. They started on a small bench together. Nothing fancy, but strong. It sat outside the house, overlooking the field. Lottie called it the thinking seat. The biggest change came slowly, like the turning of a season. Jasper stopped watching the road. For months, he had looked out every morning, half expecting trouble. But one day he realized he hadn't done that in weeks. The fear was still there, tucked somewhere deep, but it no longer controlled his breath or tightened his chest. And then there was the garden. It started as a patch Sarah once tilled with her bare hands, now wild, overgrown. Willa cleared it with Joe and Hazel, and Jasper helped dig new rows. They planted carrots, beans, squash, even sunflowers at Lottie's request. He called them watchers because their faces followed the sky. Each seed they placed into the ground felt like a promise of staying, of returning, of making something grow where something had once been lost. They held a little supper outside the day the first sprouts came up, just the 5 of them. Hazel brought fresh bread and Willa roasted vegetables. Joe made a toast, awkward but proud, and Lottie clapped with his mouth full. Jasper just sat back and watched them. The way Willa leaned into Hazel's shoulder. The way Joe elbowed Lottie when he tried to sneak a second helping. The way the wind carried the sound of their laughter like a hymn. He didn't speak until the end of the meal. He stood up slowly and cleared his throat. "I never thought I'd live in a house with boys again," he said. "I didn't think I deserved it." Willa looked up, his brow furrowed. Joe paused, hands folded. "But you came," Jasper continued, his voice rough but steady. "You came and brought this house back to life. I want you to know you don't owe me anything. You're not here because I saved you. You're here because you saved me." No one spoke right away. Then Willa stood and walked to him. "You're our family," he said. Joe nodded. "We want to stay. Forever." Jasper felt something inside him break and heal at the same time. He knelt down, arms wide, and all 3 of them crashed into him. Joe awkward, Willa stiff at first, Lottie like a cannonball. Hazel watched with tears in her eyes, her hand pressed over her heart. That night, Jasper sat on the porch with Hazel. The stars were out. The garden was still. He looked at her. "I think I want to make this official. Proper adoption." Hazel nodded. "I'll help." They didn't say more. They didn't have to. By the time summer came in full, the house was louder. Fuller. Better. Willa painted the windowsills with leftover whitewash. Joe built a swing for Lottie under the oak tree. Hazel stayed more often, even kept a drawer in the bedroom. And Jasper, he laughed. He joked. He cried less, and when he did, it didn't feel like drowning. One morning, Lottie handed Jasper a drawing. It was a house with 5 people, 2 goats, a garden, and a sunrise. At the top, in shaky letters, he had written, "Home." Jasper folded the picture and tucked it into his shirt pocket. He didn't need to hang it on the wall. He carried it everywhere he went.